Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Great Leadership. My guest today, Oscar Munoz. He is the former chairman and CEO at United Airlines. He's also the best-selling author of a book called Turnaround Time, Uniting an Airline and Its Employees in the Friendly Skies. And today we're going to be talking about a few different topics, assuming we'll get to all of them. So we'll talk a little bit about Oscar's background, how he became CEO. He actually has a very, very interesting background that allowed him to get to that CEO role. We're also going to be looking at leadership lessons that he learned during his career, issues, or maybe Oscar's thoughts on the current business climate that we're seeing today. There's a lot of conversation happening around a variety of topics. We'll explore some of the mistakes and challenges that Oscar went through during his time as CEO. I also wanted to ask Oscar what nobody says, what nobody talks about when it comes to being a CEO or a top executive. We hear a lot of stories around how to be a great leader, but I always find that when I ask CEOs, what is it that nobody talks about? Some interesting insights come up there. And then we'll also perhaps get to a conversation around virtual versus in-person work as well. So having said all that, Oscar, welcome to the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. Take a bit spot. It's an honor. My voice is a little down because it's there's a lot of things going on, medical. Health wellness wise in the country, and I think I've cut all of them in the last few weeks.
One of
So
each, huh?
I'm still a little hoarse.
Yeah. I used to be a former global services member pre-pandemic when I was traveling, speaking at a lot of events, and the pandemic really screwed up my status with United. So I dropped down, but I'm hoping this year to get back up to global services again. So I'm a loyal United customer, as is my wife. Um, why don't we start with just some background information about you? Because you have a very interesting story around where you came from, coming from Mexico, how you were raised, and how you ultimately became the CEO of one of the largest and most known companies in the world. So, how did that path look like for you?
It sounds unconventional when I talk about it, but then as I talk about it, and I open my eyes and ears to the world around me today in America. And I find that it's not necessarily all that different than so many people that have, taken advantage of the wonderfulness that this country and the opportunities this country still offers to people. And I know it's kind of we're fan favorites right now in political season to denigrate anything and everything about ourselves, but it's still a pretty good place, and it's been a great
Yeah.
place of opportunity. But to your concept, I was born to a single mother in the northern part of Mexico, a city called Juarez, which is right across the border from El Paso, a border town. Never knew my father. Never knew that I didn't have a father till much later in life. But I spent my formative early years with my maternal grandmother, a woman we call Mama Josefina. It was just, we always have cute phrases for our grandmothers, who continues to be one of the most impactful and memorable and one that I attribute so many things to as far as who I am, not only just as a business leader, but as a human. This is a woman who lost her husband at a fairly early age, never really had a job, cleaned home, did odd jobs, and took care of a child for her daughter who had moved to the United States with my uncle to make a place for herself here in this country and eventually bring me, and which is what happened. And so, this grandmother of mine, we traveled around dusty roads and small towns, visiting family and friends. We didn't have a home of her own or our own, but if you know the Latino culture, there's familia is this incredible bonding experience that no matter where you are, there's always someone there willing to take you in. So we traveled around and spent many of those things. And again, what I remember most vividly is her incredible work ethic, her just unbelievable approach to life, and that nothing bothered her, never complained, never cast a bad word against anyone else. Always, did more than her share in every single place, and I never felt more comforted and confident and secure than when my hand was in hers. And you remember those vivid moments and like, oh, how wonderful.
Hmm.
But then I have had experiences, and we'll talk about a few of them, where that upbringing and those philosophies and that approach to life that she left as sort of latent and dormant values in me came to life
Yeah.
in real life, very nasty situations that you face, in your world and in your life.
So how did you become CEO of United Airlines? I talked to Doug Parker recently from American Airlines as well, which I was going to ask you about. So that's why his name popped in. So how did you become the CEO of United Airlines, right? I mean, you're raised by a single mom in Mexico. How did you end up in the States? What was the first job that you had? And how did you ultimately end up at United?
Yeah, so eventually immigrated. My uncle and I came down and got my grandmother and I, and we came across the border and began to settle in my new life with my official mother, and then she had remarried and had started a family. There's ever an awkward situation when even as a young child you immediately know. It's weird. The bond that I felt for my mother when I saw her get out of a car at the home I was staying of my uncle, and when I first just connected with her, it was that father son biological father mother son connection. I could feel it immediately. Uh, Her new husband, my new dad, was a completely different story. As you might imagine, there was a little bit of tension there. And so settled in and just really began to just live life with my new family and go to school. So many paths along the way where someone took notice and provided guidance and advice. Most notably, a high school counselor, Mrs. Duckworth, who caught me in a hallway once and said, "Hey, I've seen your test scores. Where are you thinking of going to college?"
Hmm.
My answer, because of my dad was a union blue collar meat cutter, my mom was stay at home, and all our community were, in essence, blue collar workers. I mean, we weren't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy. And I had a large family. There was 9 of us, so we were living this wonderful life. And this person who just stopped me literally in the hallway and asked me about college, and my answer to her question about all of this was simply, "What's a college?" And I think that's a key learning and thought I would provide to all your listeners in this world where DEI and all those terms have become political. And so, we forget the very basic aspect of just really caring about another human being,
Yeah.
regardless. And but for that chance conversation of a counselor telling me about this concept of college, it literally in my community, it was just not an option because it just wasn't known. It was, I mean, ignorance for lack of a better term. Plenty of people, apparently I had the capability intellectually to go on to college, but I would have never gone there but for someone. So I always offer that to people who like, what can I do? What can I do? It's like, just look around you, look where opportunity and talent and skills exist, and try to provide even a simple hand like, have you ever thought about going to college? And so that's my diversity sort of story. So that led me to get admitted to several colleges, including big one in Boston, which I wrote about in my book. And I can't tell you how many questions I get from those alum, like, why wouldn't you come here? Because I didn't know. I was this silly surfer kid in Huntington Beach, California, and USC, Southern Cal, was just down the street and still within wave distance. So that's why I chose to go there, and I had a wonderful scholarship to go there. So went through the whole college process. And learned so much, right? In college is just not education from an academic perspective, but about life. I learned what careers look like and what options are and what people around me have, which is the exposure that I didn't have back at home in my community, which then I tend to want to provide back to our community as I've gotten to this stage in life. Went through college and got a job, um, and a lot of bumps along the way, and started working in the finance world. First at Coke, first at Pepsi, and then at Coke, and then spread out to a host of other positions that eventually led me to become a C-suite person. Then I was offered a role as a my first board of directors at an early age for an airline, Continental Airlines, which I became there as part of the finance committee, chaired the finance committee.
Was that when Hollis Harris was there?
No,
It was
the name
after, right?
doesn't
Because he
sound
was there
familiar.
in the early '90s, I think, right? Hollis Harris, the former CEO of Continental. I think he left in like '93.
No, yeah. Yeah, so I joined the board of United in 2004.
Okay, yes, this was after he
So I
passed
was
away.
with the, yeah. So this was a famous Gordon Bethune was the CEO at the time. Was a very famous aviation figure. So I joined the board and was enjoying that part. And my role I had switched from I went from Pepsi to Coke to AT&T, and then went to the small unheard of company called CSX, which is a railroad company, which was a great success because we took it from a 7 billion market cap to close to a 70 billion market cap
Wow.
in the course of a decade. So had a lot of success as part of that team. I learned so much about so many things. And I had become president and soon to be CEO 6 weeks when, as part of the board that I had, we had merged with United, lots of troubles with the company, union issues, employee issues, and
Mm.
broadly, a lot of customer issues, financial issues. So the company was in trouble. And then the current CEO at the time got into a little trouble of himself with some issues, and the board came to me and said, "Would you be interested? Possibly, we've talked about it. You're on our list. Would you have an interest there?" My first response was, "No, thank you. I have this job. I am weeks away from being announced as the next CEO here, and didn't really want to do it." But as the summer progressed and things became more apparent that the current airline CEO would be gone, I went through a whole process of, which we can talk about later, of how do you make that decision? The one in the hand versus two in the bush, and you have this and that. And I write a whole long chapter on this because I just think it's such a pertinent conversation that so many people have with each other, not necessarily with CEO roles, but many roles. And then that's how eventually the decision for me personally was, what do I do best, and which of these two positions offers me the most capability to really do what I do best. And staying there, we had built the company to where it was, and I would have just sat there and enjoyed the fruits of labor and
Yeah.
started succession planning for my next role, which, I mean, doesn't sound like a bad thing. And of course, United was infinitely more difficult and broken, but what it needed was a healing of people and bridging of ideas and bringing them together, which again I felt was a thing that I do really well. So went and took that challenge.
You mentioned two things that I wanted to touch on. One is I love your story, and you were talking about a little bit of denigrating ourselves in America and kind of the state of the world now. And I was on my grandparents and my parents had a very similar path. By the way, they came from the Republic of Georgia. They had no money, didn't speak English, and were able to build a life for themselves here. And I was sharing this story with somebody else on a podcast, and he asked me if I thought the American dream was still attainable, if the American dream still exists. And I told him it was, but it's just not. We don't tell those stories anymore. I think we have the wrong heroes. We have the wrong stories that we focus on in today's business world. And you're right. It seems like in today's business climate, we're doing a lot of apologizing. We're doing a lot of it's almost like victimhood in a lot of different environments that we're starting to see. And so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. What do you think of just the overall business climate? Are we spending too much time apologizing, not taking accountability, blaming others, being victims? Is the American dream still something that is attainable in your eyes?
Well, we could spend an hour on this point in this debate. I am very bullish on American and on America and the concept of democracy. In my role at United, we traveled to 70 some different countries. I have visited nearly 90% of them. I have met heads of state. I had met the cabinets of all these various countries because, as a U.S. based airline that flies into almost any country in the world,
Yeah.
that's a huge positive brand for that country. So when someone in my position shows up in that country, the doors open and I have access to all of these things. So I have met heads of state from massive countries like China to small countries that we fly in different places, I'm a big culture person, and I'm a good traveler in the sense that I very much respect what other countries are and what they mean and what they do. Working with China is a particular difficult aspect of that, so I'm very much aligned with that. And so when I say about our opportunity and how democracy is so helpful, it comes from a position not just of waving the patriotic red, white, and blue. I've been through all these folks, and I know how it operates there. And I know how opportunity for an individual, someone like myself of that background, to be able to journey through all of this and get through all of those layers to get to a point where, not only something for myself and my family, but I think for a lot of the people that I've had a chance to lead. So
Yeah.
I think the opportunity is live and well. Is it more difficult? Is the environment different? Leadership traits, everything has changed. Social media, I've lived personally and painfully through the advent of viral videos that,
Yes.
that have impacted us, which we can talk about. And so, the big issue that I see is this divide that is growing between the factions, where no one interfaces with someone else on a human level. Everything is done through intermediaries, either staff
Yeah.
or social media, increasingly. So people just get more and more and more entrenched in their view, and their levels of information come from those kinds of sources. So it just that vacuum that just, and then you just get twirled up, and no one actually says. And again, I talk about, again, I hate to keep pointing to the book, but I talk about this. I have solved some of the biggest issues that in business, a union issue that gone 7 years, where just fighting and fighting and fighting. And within months, I had it settled by a very simple concept. I reached out to the opposing person and I sat down with her, and we had this bonding moment over a simple question when I asked her, how did you get started in this union thing? And the story she told me would make you tear up. And so I knew that this is a human being who's doing what she's doing because she really, really means it.
Hmm.
And we may be adversaries, but at least I know that you are doing it for the right
Yeah.
reasons, and you're not just for self-adulation and narcissistic and, I want to be this telegenic persona on TV. She really meant, and that meant the world to me. I can work with that person. But
Yeah.
we began to solve that issue immediately. And so it's examples like that that just don't happen. That makes it difficult for leaders, and why your podcast, your wives, and everyone that does this work for this next generation of leaders, just to remind them that there was a time and a place where it was okay to call someone and say, hey, how do we get past this? And stop just, snapping at each other.
What if there was a resource out there that could make you a better leader? That could teach you how to create an organizational culture where your employees are engaged, where you could go to figure out how to create a future-ready organization. Well, good news for you, I've put that together on my Substack, which you can find at greatleadership.substack.com. We have tens of thousands of members from around the world who every week are getting access to exclusive CEO interviews, leadership hacks and tips, in-depth guides and articles that I write, where I share insights and strategies that I come up with and come across in my ongoing and regular work. So if you want to step up your leadership game, if you want to excel in your career, if you want to create a company where employees are engaged at work, and if you are interested in building a future-ready organization, then head over to greatleadership.substack.com. Again, that is greatleadership.substack.com. I'll see you there. What do you think about the current work ethic in today's business world, maybe especially in the States, right? I mean, your grandmother's work ethic, your mom's work ethic. I'm thinking of like my parents, my grandparents. Do you think that work ethic still exists of no complaining, do whatever you need to do, make sacrifices? I mean, even when you became CEO, right? I mean, what I'm getting from you and from your book is you worked much harder than a lot of your peers. You made a lot of sacrifices. You did things that other people didn't want to do. You took jobs that were harder than the jobs that your peers wanted to take, and you never saw yourself as a victim. You never felt sorry for yourself. Nobody felt sorry for you, your grandmother. You don't come from a family where people feel sorry for each other. And that work ethic is, a big part of what helped you get to where you are. Do you think we still have that work ethic today?
The conversation about work ethic started more profusely sort of after COVID, and this concept of, work from home or go back to the office, and all the debate that's been going, and the now new established hybrid model, and the benefits that so many people receive from being at home, and I don't have to drive, and being with my family. There's so many wonderful things on both sides. And I think it's created a label that if you don't want to work from the office, you're lazy, and that's not necessarily true. And going to the office does not necessarily mean you have a work ethic. It just means that you just want to get away from your apartment. So I think we're too quick to label things. I am a fundamental believer that we are products of our environment, and over time, I think this generation that's having this debate, well, I want to be a remote worker, I want to work from the office. I think over time, what our people are going to see, this is this beyond work ethic, the importance of interacting with other humans on a daily basis in a human way has a value that's exponentially more beneficial for you as a human with how you interact and learn from people, but also how your career progresses. And whatever model companies sort of operate, they need to begin to be creative and adapt to provide both the things, because
Yeah.
we are not going back to a full-blown 9 to 5 Monday through Friday thing, because I think people are just going to, the environment is that. So on both sides, I tell everybody, again, like everything else, try to meet somewhere in the middle. I have children who, they're having their children, and the benefit of being at home has been wonderful. But then at the same time, they're going to start complaining that their career isn't moving on as much as they could.
Yeah.
And
Career.
it's like,
Yeah.
well, there's a reason. And so there's a bit of a trade-off, and I don't want to label it as work ethic. It's just the environment. So companies are beginning to really adapt around that and provide.
Yeah, but do you think that work ethic still exists just generally, whether you're in the office or at home? Of your grandmother, your mom's work ethic, again, the kind of that immigrant mentality work ethic. Do you think it still exists in a lot of organizations around the world? Because my observation and a lot of the observations that I get from CEOs that I interview is that it's taken a hit. It's not the same now as it used to be. Today it seems like a lot of employees, and Mark Randolph, the first CEO of Netflix, actually gave me this analogy. He said that one of his rules for success was that he always tried to do 10% more than what was asked of him. And it seems like in today's business environment, if you ask employees to do 10% more, you're going to get a lot of pushback on that. And I don't know. I mean, it just feels like, and
Yeah.
I don't know if there's necessarily data on this. I mean, there was the Pew survey that came out fairly recently, which said that American values are in decline. Hard work was still at the top of the list, but it also took a hit since the survey was being conducted, in terms of our how much we value hard work is not as high as it used to be in the past, whereas money went up. And that to me is kind of a scary environment, right? Where you care more about money, you care less about community, you care less about family, you care less about patriotism, you care less about all these things, and hard work is going down, but you also care more about money. So I don't know. My general feel is that work ethic is just not the same as it used to be.
Yeah. So uh, again, I am a forever optimistic person and bullish, and I practice what I preach. In that, as a person of my generation that did what he did and worked as I did, and want to sort of sometimes feel impose those viewpoints on my children and that next generation, I guard myself against that, because I remember when I was that young and people were telling me that you have to do this and have to do that. I mean, it was simple as dress code, right? I grew up in an environment where you didn't leave your little cubicle without,
Yeah.
you always wear a tie without your coat on. And I'm like, that's just so stupid. It's like, well, I just, I don't have. And so I spend a lot of time with this younger set and their views on this, and doing my own sort of internal research. I don't believe that they're lazy or lack work ethic. In fact, they are insulted by that very concept.
Hmm.
They work differently. They work 24/7. They'll argue. I'll be working at 2 o'clock in the morning after I put my child to bed, and we'll do 2 hours with the productive work that it took my peer who doesn't have. So they have those viewpoints. Now, are they valid? Are they not valid? I don't think people feel that they're being lazy. I think the work environment has changed so drastically. What we as leaders and companies and leadership have to do is to provide people this understanding and awareness that human interaction, we are social animals by
Yeah.
design, right? I mean, from the earliest philosophers, they've said that. In order to make true connections, friendships, be able to influence folks, I think you're going to, not think, I believe you're going to have to make the effort to go into the office, go into places that do that. And not doing that is going to result. And I think people are going to learn that and make the decision to, is it work harder, work smart, whatever it is. But I don't think people are lazier. Now, as a society, uh, I do have more strong feelings on that. I think, there's a phrase I learned a long time ago that all great civilizations first implode from within. And if you think of what's happening in our nation, I mean, we are getting fat, dumb, lazy, and happy. We're just, everybody's comfortable with, again, reality TV shows and social media, and we're forgetting the things that are going on around the world. So I do think as a civilization we are heading down that. Do I want to blame that on the new generation that maybe doesn't have the work ethic that we had, or the same sort of approach to work? I'm not quite ready to do that. I'd rather focus my efforts on bringing that next generation to realize the values of the world and how we bridge those things. And that's a benefit. So blah, blah, blah. We can go on for that forever. But I don't want to, we were young once and had views,
No.
and people disregarded those. And so how we go back there and make sure that we hear them is a good practice for me.
You also mentioned DEI, which I wanted to just quickly touch on before we move on. What are your thoughts on what's going on with the whole DEI debate now? It was even very recently, Elon Musk and Mark Cuban got into an argument. Elon Musk is saying that Mark Cuban is a racist. Elon Musk is saying DEI needs to die. I think a few people even brought up United Airlines, saying that I think by 2030, half of the 5,000 pilots are supposed to be women or minorities. Even that got a lot of pushback, and people were saying, what does race and gender have to do with it? We just want the pilots who can fly the best. And there's just so much polarization and debate. And is DEI good? And is it bad? And what does it mean? That it's confusing a lot of people. So where do you
Yeah.
stand on that DEI front?
I rarely use the term or the phrase because it's so loaded with
It
political,
is.
sort of
It is.
orientation, as opposed to, I like to speak about it. Uh, so access and equality are human traits that we've all been afforded, and certain parts of America forget that their previous generations went through the similar issues, but now that they're established, it's like, I don't need to do this for someone else yet. Your great grandparents had the same issues that people face now. So, we are a nation of immigrants. We should be open and embracing the whole Statue of Liberty concept. So I believe in that, maybe because I'm an immigrant, maybe because I've taken advantage of it. But at the same time, the business and the economics behind a lot of this is the way I choose to do things, whether it's sustainability, whether it's DEI. I have sold the concepts not on, you need to put more people of color on your board or those sorts of things. You should. It makes great sense. You add broader thought. But the economics, like in my world, the Latino cohort in America, their GDP, if you measure their economic output, is the fifth largest nation in the world here in America. So
Mhm.
when I go speak to CEOs and their companies about not diversity efforts, but marketing efforts, sales efforts, hiring efforts, it's the fastest growing voting
Yeah.
population. It's the fastest
And
growing
that makes
people.
sense. That makes sense.
Yes.
And I wish more people talked about it in that language, because to me, and especially on Twitter, right, and even on LinkedIn, whenever you hear a lot of DEI stuff, it's just infused with politics, race-based quotas, affirmative action. Look at what happened to Harvard. Look at what happened to all these universities, and it's no longer about, like you said, business sense. It becomes political. But I wish more leaders would take your advice and kind of frame efforts. And you don't even call it DEI. Focus on what you need to do to grow the business, to expand marketing opportunities, to bring in the best talent, and not, focus on some of those other aspects that are traditionally political when it comes to DEI. But it seems like we're not
Yeah.
able to do that.
And the trick is to do more than talk. So, in my particular heritage, started a conference where we present all this information. We bring all these CEOs, top CEOs of all large companies, and let them see that. I mean, Walmart's 5-year growth rate, almost 90% of it is Latino based.
Mm.
So you go to the CEO, Doug, and say, "Did you know this?" And I did not. And so, as a business person, he turns to his company. It's like, what are we doing to promote brands, products, advertising, marketing that embraces that growing consumer base? That's all that people want. Just recognize that I'm a power, an economic powerful. And then, with regards to the quotas and all that sort of stuff, it's just it is an increasingly affluent and educated opportunities, and so the access and equality is what gets people to some degree. It's like, well, we're being shut out of this, and that's just hard to manage. That's an emotional conversation,
Yeah.
and we're never going to fight that. But back to the divide, this is the issue. It's like people entrench themselves, and I'm not going to listen to that. I don't care. I'm a white male, and my opportunities are being limited. Now, after a couple hundred years of you being the only person that had benefit in this country, yeah, it probably feels a little bit that you're getting. And so it's a never ending issue. I prefer to attack it and approach it from a purely fact based perspective. Do you like customers? Do you like business growth? Do you see that this is a good, sort of vehicle of new consumer base? You should focus your efforts on that. Stop. End of
Do what
sentence.
makes sense
You
for the
do what you need
business.
to do.
Do what
Yeah,
makes sense for the
yeah.
business. But so tied to that, is merit still important? In other words, and I think this is one of the big arguments that we're seeing in the DEI space, is some people are saying, well, you're sacrificing competency based on DEI initiatives. So when you look at it, is competence still important? Like, you still need to be good at your job or the best at your job. You still need to be the best marketer, the best pilot, the best whatever. There's no substitute for that competency and for that merit.
Yeah, absolutely, 1000%. There is nothing worse. And I faced this in a very prominent company many years ago when there was a backlash, and the company's reaction was to promote a large group of African Americans to more senior positions. What happened within the next year or so is the majority of those people that were elevated did not work out in their new roles.
Hmm.
So it created this, oh, see, they aren't ready, or they weren't, it wasn't that at all. They were prematurely moved. I mean, if somebody had elevated me to be a CEO 10 years before my time, I would have failed. It had nothing to do with my heritage or my hair color or the shirt I wore. It had to do, I'm just not ready. So the concept of diversity and inclusion is access, equality, promote, put people, just do all the pipeline management. But merit absolutely has to be,
Yeah.
because the worst thing that you can do, and speaking from my heritage, is to promote someone with a last name like mine that fails at their job. It just gives credibility to the people that want to denigrate the capability of those things. And by the way, people do not put people in senior roles just because of their ethnicity. There may be one of the options of all of the things being equal, but people don't take that kind of risk. Why would you put a CEO in place? Well, Oscar, he's. Have you heard he's Mexican? That's like, we should put him in there versus others. It's like that just doesn't happen. But again, if you build a cadre and a pipeline, you have opportunity to pick from all sorts of different people, and then the best man slash woman slash whatever personal adjective you choose, pronoun, should get the role,
Yeah.
and should be measured like everyone else. 1,000, anything less than that is absolute bullcrap, because
Yeah.
it'll just destroy the system. It's
Yeah.
just
But
it's
the
not it's
best
not
person
profitable.
for the job. I like that. And again, I wish more leaders paid attention to that. Uh,
And by the way, a quick thing on, and you mentioned the term, the concept of Aviate, which is our pilot program that we have.
yes.
It's simply access. It's like, we need pilots, and the unsourced source for potential pilots is underrepresented minorities and women, because they think it's a male thing, so they don't even go there. We are just providing them an opportunity to get in the system and do it, and they do well. Back to merit, we don't get to let them fly just because we've decided to fly. The rigors and discipline of FAA certification and testing, all of them have to go. There's not a single pilot getting through the system, regardless of race, color, sex, creed, or planet they're from, just because. And that's the
Yeah.
the fallacy that was presented by people on Fox, where the skies just became a lot less safer. It's like, what the hell?
That is,
So there's just,
yeah, that's one of the big challenges, right? It's very easy externally, and this happened with Bud
oh,
Light,
sure.
this happened with United, this
Oh,
happened with a lot of institutions. I mean, plenty of them out there. And it's one thing to make a comment externally as an outsider. It's another thing to actually know what's going on. And to be honest, a lot of us don't know why some of these people got promoted. And it's very easy to just make assumptions. And I've been guilty of that. I'm sure a lot of people have been guilty of that. But I love that you emphasize that there is no substitute for merit. And I just want leaders and people to pay attention to that there's no substitute. Um, I want to shift gears a little bit because 37 days into your tenure at United Airlines, you had a pretty bad, very scary thing happen to you. Can you share what happened and kind of what was going through your mind?
Yeah. So I had a massive coronary situation, a heart blockage that would have killed, 99 and a half out of 100 people. and
It's terrifying.
and I think the message, and thank you for asking because it's a bit of a PSA for me. Heart disease is the biggest killer in America by far.
Yeah.
I mean, cancer has nothing on heart disease. And the reason why is that the symptoms associated with heart disease or a heart event are so many and varied and different for men and women that we often don't recognize it. And I have a good friend. And by the way, when I had my heart attack, I had just raced in a 100-mile bike race where I placed in the
Wow.
top 10%. I was a vegan, and so, from a heart condition perspective, you would think I was not necessarily can. But that's the thing about heart disease. It's inside, it's your plumbing, it's DNA. It has nothing necessarily to do with how you look necessarily. And my friend, who's a cardiovascular surgeon, would always tell us, it's like, listen, some of the youngest and some of the people that die on my operating table, you would be surprised at how relatively young and fit they are. They don't know of their internal mechanisms. And today's medicine doesn't do a lot to do preventative
Yeah.
work in that regard. So sometimes it presents itself as a heart attack, and then you don't have time. So his quick advice and advice I'll share with you and your viewers because it's just important. He said, if you ever feel anything weird, use that term, and we all know what weird is.
Yeah.
And he goes, just call 911. The worst you can be is embarrassed. And, on one fateful morning after going on a 5-mile run and drinking my vegan protein shake, my phone rang across my temporary apartment. And I heard it buzz and I turned to go get it. And my legs felt wobbly. And I didn't think much, but as I took another step, my legs gave out and I was clammy. And the words that
Oh,
came to my head were, okay, that's weird. And his words came coming back, and I crawled to a landline, which some of you may know what it is. And I immediately called 911 and, told them where I was because the other thing he had said to me, when you call 911, he says, immediately tell them where you are. Like, that makes sense. He goes, because you may not make it past the phone call. And I
mm.
remember thinking how dramatic that sounded. But in that moment, feeling the way I did, crawling to that phone, it was immediately, here's where I am.
Yeah, it's and you're in good. I mean, you're healthy. You look after yourself. I mean, that to
Yeah,
me is like a huge fear.
no. And the miracle of everything that happened afterwards, again, outlined in the book, was crazy because I 37 minutes later, I was on life support on a medically induced coma and eventually had a heart transplant a few months later. And then, 7 days after that transplant, was back at work.
It's
And I've been
crazy.
going ever since. So mine's a true miracle, but mostly because I called immediately. So for your audience, just remember that story if you remember
Oh,
nothing else.
that's terrible. Yeah. I mean, I had a panic attack a couple years ago, which I've never had, so I thought it was a heart attack, and it was the most terrifying thing that's ever happened to me. So I can only imagine what having a heart attack might feel like.
Well, it's funny because people don't recognize that it's a heart attack. So especially guys, I mean, we tend to like, I'll take a shower, I'll just sit down or lay down.
Yeah.
In our situation, you're never getting back up. So just remember that. It's just
Oh,
because it is that significant.
I learned something absolutely mind-boggling today. 96% of the people who watch videos on this channel are not even subscribed to it. Are you one of those people? Hopefully not. But if you are, please hit that subscribe button. It helps me grow the channel, and you'll get notified when new videos just like this one are released. Now, let's get back to the content. So, in the remaining time that we have left before we get into kind of that last 20-minute tactical stuff, a few things that I wanted to go over. One, during your time at United, what do you think were the most valuable leadership lessons that you've learned that you could pass on to other current or aspiring leaders in other businesses?
Oh gosh, where do we start? I think over one of the things you learn when you become as experienced as we are age-wise, you just learn to how, at least I have, to how to paraphrase topics into digestible pieces. Um, Advice from a personal development perspective, something I call swing easy.
Hmm.
We try too hard sometimes. We try to impress others. We try to present this facade of what we want you to think we are. And we spend so much effort in doing that, where honestly, most of us that are experienced can see right through that. So the concept of swing easy is like learn who you are and what you do best and do that really well. And the things you don't do so well, find others around you that support you. And then together you're going to be better. So
Focus
swing
on your
easy.
strengths.
Don't
Yeah.
try so hard. Yeah, don't. I mean, you try so hard, you leave people behind, you step on toes. It's just not a good thing. The other one is to know yourself, and I always say, no, really, we all have, we're all petty, greedy, selfish. All of those traits are within us. The best of us understand those and manage them with our positives so that we can be balanced in our together. We're all human. We all have frailties. So the better you know yourself and the better you know how it will help you make decisions when you're switching jobs. It'll help you make decisions in your personal relationships. Why should I do this? Hey, I want to do things because we talked about this work ethic and the concept of money. I want to make money. Then embrace the hell out of that. Just own it. Don't pretend it's not. And just, and then realize that there's downsides to that. But knowing yourself is a really important thing. The other, the things become a little bit, harder after that. But, this concept that I use of listen, learn, and lead, as a leader, when you step into a role, how do you process what you've inherited, and how do you truly listen to the people that work there and learn from them before you come in with all your wonderful great ideas? Because as great ideas as you might have, they may not be just ready for prime time, given that you haven't taken the time to understand what the situation is.
Hmm.
The turnaround of United is a great example. I talk a lot about that. Everybody had ideas for me about what to do first. I chose to go to the frontline folks to truly get to
Yeah, you did a
the
listening tour,
first.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And so that was a key thing to truly understanding what was ailing United. It wasn't necessarily strategy or technology or aircraft or tools or systems or anything. The basic human culture that drove this concept of the friendly skies, the friendly part was gone because we had killed it. We had killed it. And you could see that in every conversation I had. So we went back at regaining the trust of our employees. So this concept of listen, learn, and lead. And then lastly, what I would say, something that's very simple, but proof, not promise.
Hmm.
People, especially at United, we had 8 CEOs before me in the previous 10 years. And every person came in and says, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And I'm going to do this for you. And we're going to do this. And it was all promise and there was never proof. So a human being just gets, it gets old. It's easy to cast dispersions at our political system, but you get a lot of that there, right? Everybody in political season is promising, we're going to end homelessness. We're going to make everyone rich. And then none of that ever happens. So, um, for anyone that travels, if you see somebody that's Legacy United that was there when I was there, you will always get a smile and you'll always get a phrase that he never promised something that he didn't deliver on. And I was very careful what I promised, obviously. But at the same time, that proof, not promise, and whatever you do, there's no greater legacy or perception or respect that you get from your working peers that says, that Jacob, nice guy, but you know what I really like about him? It's like when I go to something for him, and he says he's going to do it, it's done. I mean, or he meet all those kinds of things, that genuine sort of thing. It blows away work ethic, and whether you're in the office or not, who you are as a human to others makes a really big difference. So those are just some of the few things that I would throw out.
Last question for you before we transition to the last segment. Can you talk a little bit about what that listening tour looked like? Because I feel like a lot of leaders out there want to do a listening tour or think about listening tours, whether it's for a team or a function or for the whole company. But we talk about it, but we don't necessarily know what that means. So when you did this listening tour, did you have a set of questions? Did you do one-on-one meetings? Like, how did you structure that? What does a listening tour actually mean?
So there's a lot of conversations about this because my approach is a bit different and contrarian because of who I am. So my style is infinitely more informal. I come from a similar background to a lot of people that work at United in those front lines. I speak several languages. I look like I look, and so I fit in very quickly when I need to. Not just by appearance and speech, whatever. Just I empathize. I truly care, and I know what their lives are like because I led that life. I know what my dad came home, after 14-hour days and had to go back the next morning at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I did his taxes, and I know at the top of his year how much money he made to support 9 kids. So I understand and have empathy with that. And so my process isn't hey, let's have meetings and let me make speeches and let me write notes and have focus groups. My interest was simply I just walked into places, every nook and cranny of every airport and out in the hangars at the middle of the night when they're all working. You just walk in and start talking to people, and they don't want to talk to you at first because, again, they've seen many people like you. They don't care to hear from you. It's just going to be more promise and no proof and just a bunch of bull. And so my approach was to regain the trust of those employees by truly being where they work and asking them questions, not promising that I was going to fix everything,
Yeah.
but just the mere act of asking, how's it going? What do you need? And another, probably a crucible watershed moment in United's turnaround history was a conversation I had with a flight attendant on a flight after doing this for right before my heart attack, actually. I walked up to her and she did not want to talk to me. And she's like, I just don't have any time for this because they were still that resistance. And she finally broke down, literally in tears, and then said the words that really made sense to me. She said, I'm just tired of always having to say, I'm sorry.
Hmm.
So here's a flight attendant who just shows up to work, tries to get you on your way safely, get your coffee or your meal or whatever, but planes are late, and she has no control over that. The coffee sucks. She has no control over that. So all her entire life is spent apologizing for things she has no control over. That generates this level of disconnect that is pretty significant.
Yeah.
And so for me, that was a very watershed moment. It's like, that's when I realized we've lost the trust of our own employees. We can't ask them to do anything more because
Hmm.
why should they? Because they're getting beat up. And so we went about this process of really regaining their trust, as that was the first big initiative that we took at United.
Hmm. Well, let's transition to the last part of the podcast. I call it the Leader's Toolkit, where we focus on something specific and kind of dive deep into that. And I thought it would be interesting to talk to you about turning things around, turning around a person, a team, a function, a business, whatever it is, turning something around when it's not going in the right direction. And I think there's probably a lot of analogies between turning around a company versus even turning around an individual employee if they're struggling. So when you think of turnaround, how did you turn around the businesses that you were a part of? What were those steps that you took? And do you think those steps could also be applied down to an individual level if you see an employee that's struggling or is not performing well? That's it for my conversation with Oscar Munoz, unless, of course, you are a subscriber to Great Leadership Plus. And if you subscribe to the bonus episode, you are going to get access to another follow-up conversation where Oscar and I talk about how to actually turn around either a person, a team, or a company. He's going to go through some of the steps that he uses and some of the steps that you can use in your career and in your life as well. This is only available to subscribers on Apple Podcasts for Great Leadership Plus. And when you subscribe, you'll get access to a weekly bonus episode as well as ad-free listening. So again, Great Leadership Plus on Apple Podcasts. Also, join our community, greatleadership.substack.com. You can just enter your email there and you'll get notified whenever new episodes are released. Lots of cool content, news, and updates that we're going to be putting up going forward. And if you want to grab a copy of my new book, Leading with Vulnerability, head to leadwithvulnerability.com. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if there's somebody in your life who you would like to see become a better leader, please send them this episode. I'll see you next time.